Hello everyone, welcome to this lesson. So in this lesson we're going to go through inbuilt functions, and we describe what inbuilt functions are. They are the functions that are already coded into Excel when you download it and install it. Now those are very useful that we're going to use later on. We're going to go through 14 of them right now. There are extras that we're going to use later on, but I think it's best to describe them within context to best grasp those concepts. One thing I want to go through before we begin is that there are functions that are apparent to the Excel spreadsheet. You can only find them in Excel spreadsheet, and ones that are you can use them in VBA. And sometimes they're actually different. And for one example, for instance, is natural log. The natural log inside of VBA, you just call it log, but inside of Excel, you just call it like it's naturally called ln, for instance. So we're going to go through some examples where the functions between VBA and Excel are the same. Some of instances where they are different. But also, sometimes VBA, there are certain functions that they don't have. For example, the factorial function. So we're going to learn how to actually call functions from the Excel spreadsheet if they are not available inside of VBA. So let's begin. So we're going to open a module, and I'm going to call it Inbuilt. Sub Inbuilt. And the first thing I want to go through is the round function. So the round function, what it does is it rounds any number to whatever desired decimals you want. So we can say round, and you can see here whatever number you want to round and to whatever digits you want to round. So let's say 12 point whatever numbers, and I want to round it to say the 4th decimal place. So also let's use the message box to display our answers. And you remember with the message box, we have the prompt. We say the result is, and space, and after that, and whatever I want to put as my result, which is the value that is stored within R. So if I run my code, it's going to take that number, round it to the 4th, and display it using a message box. I want to run this code, and you can see 12.4546. So it did round it up, round it to the 4th. So it has to do round to a 2nd decimal, two decimal places. So 12.45. So another one that I want to go through is the int, and we went through this before when we did with the factorial. So int, I'm going to say 12 point whatever number, and what it does, it rounds down to the nearest integer. So what I want to display using my message box is I now. So if I run this, and it's going to give me 12. It rounded down to 12. Another useful function is, I'm going to call it R1, is the rand function. And what the rand function does, it creates a random variable between 0 and 1. So let's see how this works. So now I want to display R1 in my message box. You're going to find here 0.7 is between 0 and 1. Let's run it again. 0.53 between 0 and 1. Let's run it again. 0.57 and so on. So you get the idea. Now you can also get a random function between any two values. Like in this case, this is kind of locked between 0 and 1. But what if you want to do it between, say, 20 and 70? Well, it's a little bit more complicated inside of VBA, but it's possible, and then the Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to see later. So in VBA, the way you do it is you use the int function. What is the upper limit that you would like? Let's say 70. The lower limit is, say, 20. And you say +1, and you close the parentheses, and you multiply by the rand function that we described on top, and you add the lower limit to it, and you close parentheses. So what this code is going to give us is going to give us a random value between 20 and 70, and what this int, it rounds down to the nearest integer. So let's say I want to display R2, so 35. Now we can get rid of this int, and it's going to give us a value that has a lot of decimals if you would like. But in this case, I would like usually to use the int. So if I run this again, it's going to give me 20 is between 20 and 70, 61, 22, and so on. So if you want just a random list of values, this is a very useful code to use. Any two numbers that you would like, 1 and 100 and whatever. Another function I want to go through is the log, because if I say the log of, say, 2.23, and I'm going to display L using my message box, and I run it, it's going to give me 0.802. So let's actually go on here on the spreadsheet and use the same log function. And I say 2.23. What number is it going to give us? 0.348. Completely different number, because this log that I have here, that is base 10 by default, but you can actually put it in whatever base you want. By default is base 10, and it gave me this value. This log here is actually base E. This is a natural log. So if I come here and I say natural log of 2.23, and you can see that we got the same value as we got here, 0.802. So that's one distinction I want to make, that the function that you use here, the log here, for instance, is different than the Excel. So be careful with that slight distinction. Also, there's a very simple function that you can figure out what is the sign of a number, for instance. So if I say -3, if I put this in here, and I display S, what it does is it gives you a -1, that means you're dealing with a negative number, 0 if you're dealing with a neutral number, like 0, and 1 if you're dealing with a positive number. So if I run this, I should get -1 for -3. And if I do, say, 10 in here, I should get 1 as my number, as my output, because it's positive. Now, this seems like a very, very simple function to be used, but it does have its context, and it does have its usefulness. Another thing that I want to go through is the input box, and I'm going to say input box, and similar to the message box, and I'm going to say what is the input, say, number, and question mark, and I'm going to close this, and I'm going to, whatever that number is, I want to store it inside of, say, n. And what this is going to do is actually going to create a prompt that I will input a number in. So let's say, let's actually cancel this. So what I want to do, I'm going to input, say, this number, and input any number, and say I want to round it to the nearest 2. So I'm going to say, I'm going to input a number using the input box, and then this number should be taken and stored inside of R, or be rounded to 2 decimal places and stored inside of R, and then displayed using the message box. So if I do this number, for instance, it's going to round this to 12.45 using this function here. Then it's going to display that 12.45. So if I say OK, so you can see the result is 12.45. And we can do this with anything. Let's take this n, for instance. And let's say comment this out. Let's say I want to get the natural log using the input box instead. So if I run this, 2.23, and I should get, so that's actually, I forgot to put the L as my output in the message box. If I run this, 2.23, and I will get 0.802. Another thing I want to go through is the absolute value. So the absolute value of, say, -3 is 3. The absolute value of any number is the distance from the true value, for instance. So an absolute we would use most often in error. So if I have a -30% error, it doesn't really matter whether it's a positive error or a negative error. I'm away 30% from the true value. Okay, so usually we would use absolute values when we're dealing with error. So I want to introduce this because we're going to use it quite a bit when we're dealing with error. So we're going to say absolute of, say, -3 or any negative number. It will get the positive number for that. So the output for the absolute here should be positive. So let's actually do this as using the input box. So I'm going to say -3. Oh, let me end this. Let me comment this out because the -3, this is a math error. There's no log for that. So let me run this. -3, and it's going to give me 3 as my absolute value for that. So that's very useful. We're going to use this keyword when we're dealing with errors. So let's actually move to now the sheet here. And what I want to show you here, I want to show you the R&D that you would use on the Excel sheet, and also the one that if you want to use a random number between any two desired values. And what I want to do is create a list of numbers between 0 and 1. So in this case, it's called rand. So if I do this and I press enter, I have 0.6666, and I can just use autofill and drag this down. And now I have a list of numbers that are between 0 and 1. So let me undo this. So what about if I want a list of numbers between any two desired values? We'll use the rand between, and say I want between 1 and 100, for instance, and 38 is between 1 and 100, and I drag down. So this is the difference between the functions on the Excel spreadsheet and the functions in VBA. 3 more things I want to cover is those statistical parameters that are often used, is to find the max number in a list, the minimum number of a list, and an average of a list. So if equal to max, so what that does, it takes a list of these numbers and it gets you the max of that number. Now, you saw that these values actually change, and this is a weird thing when you're dealing with the rand and the rand between, is that if you make any change into the spreadsheet, they keep generating more random numbers, a different list, and you can see how also the maximum number is changing inside that list. Also, if I do equal to min, it's going to give me the minimum number of this list, which for this new list is 12. And also if I use the average, which is just called equal to average of this list, is going to give me the average of this list, or again, the new value, the new list that it just generated. This is all the inbuilt functions that I really want to cover for now. There are more that we're going to cover in later lessons, but I want to cover them within context because I think you would most understand them within context than when they're alone. But those ones that we covered today are okay to be described alone. Well, that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in future lessons.